Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Friday, May 24th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news, and in the mailbag, we'll discuss our most underrated directors of this moment. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
Okay, some news hit yesterday afternoon after we all left the Slash Film offices, and that is that they are making a Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic movie, and we know who is writing it.
Yes, so Laeta Kalogridis, who wrote Alita Battle Angel and also Shutter Island, which is a movie I love. You know, a lot of people don't like it, is apparently writing the first of what could be a trilogy of films based on the Knights of the Old Republic games, which I have never played because I don't play games. I'm sorry, everyone. But I do know from my research for this that these games were very popular and people have long hoped for a movie based on these games, and now it looks like it's happening. And this is something completely separate from the trilogy that the Game of Thrones guys are writing and that Rian Johnson is presumably making. So, you know, even though Star Wars is taking a few years off from the movies after the Rise of Skywalker, they're already planning a whole bunch of new stuff over there at Lucasfilm, and this is one of the things.
Yeah, Kathleen Kennedy has said that they are planning the next decade of Star Wars films, and we really didn't know what that meant. At Star Wars Celebration, I think someone asked her about doing something with Knights of the Old Republic, and she said something was in the works, and now we know that something is not just a movie, but a trilogy of movies, which is pretty insane. And I think we've speculated for some time that the trilogy that the Game of Thrones guys were working on could have been a Knights of the Old Republic movie series, but it turns out it's going to be something completely different. Jacob, I brought you on this podcast because I know you are a huge fan of this game series. And I know a lot of people, including myself, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but I've never played Knights of the Old Republic. So give us the hard sell. Why should we care about a Knights of the Old Republic movie?
To be specific, I'm a fan of the first game. The sequel, not so much. But the first game is from BioWare, who went on to make the Mass Effect trilogy and other like critically acclaimed games like the Dragon Age series. And it is first and foremost a great video game. It has so many great characters. The RPG elements, it's very much a role-playing game, are really top-notch. It's very customizable. It lets you explore the Star Wars world. It's really a wonderful video game, which is why I think people love it first and foremost. And the story is interesting, not because it's the most brilliant piece of fiction you'll ever read or experience in Star Wars universe, but because it's incredibly interactive. The basic gist of the story is that a Sith leader named Darth Revan has died, and his apprentice Darth Malak has taken over the Sith Armada, and you're thrust in the middle of a war between the Sith and the Jedi and the Old Republic, taking place thousands of years before the original trilogy. And what makes the game unique is that your character, who's Jedi in training, is either going to go to the dark side or go to the light side, and you make decisions throughout the game to influence the story, and characters react to you based on your decisions you make. You see different story elements and beats play out based on whether or not make decisions that are, you know, dark, light, or shades of gray. And the reason the game is so popular is because it really gave you the feeling of being in control of the Star Wars universe and having control of your own destiny, in addition to being a really solid game. So my big question here is, how do you capture what makes that game special in a movie? I mean, the setting is cool, the supporting cast is cool, but the protagonist is literally intended to be a blank slate that you are filling in as the player. You make the choices, and you decide which story is more compelling to you if the guy becomes, you know, a Dark Lord of Sith or, you know, Ultimate Jedi Knight. So it is an incredible game, and I've played through it several times to see all the different endings, all the different options, and I find both paths very satisfying. So the question for the movie is, how do you take this really, really great sandbox and find a story in that sandbox? Because right now there isn't one outside of a really cool world.
Well, I think that's the problem with a lot of video game movies, right? Like, it's a different medium, and generally the main character is kind of for you to control and to you to create. I know this does it on a much massive level, but I wonder if approaching this, it seems like the approach to this to me would be to take that time, that that era of the Star Wars canon and exploring that, and maybe not recreating this character's story. Maybe,
but at the same time, I don't understand why you would use the Knights of the Republic name if you're not going to at least lean on the story, because what ends up happening to your character in any variation is interesting and is worthwhile and worth spending, 20 to 30 hours of your life playing that game. So I feel like if they didn't use the storyline here, which has various twists and turns that I won't spoil here, then you'd be doing fans of the game a disservice. But at the same time, there are so many more Star Wars fans. There are people who have played this very good video game from 2003. So I feel like maybe they will use it as a loose structure. I mean, I have my own headcanon as to what the right choice is for the actual events in this game, but I'm very curious to see if Lucasfilm picks one of those to be the actual right answer, because depending on where this game ends, that era of the Star Wars universe goes in a very different direction, which is why it's set so far in the past, because that way, whatever you pick, it doesn't really affect what happens, in the prequels and the original trilogy.
This also makes me wonder, the Game of Thrones guys, we had assumed that they were making a prequel in this time in Star Wars history. Now that we know that they probably are not, because they're making this other trilogy, what do you think that means for their trilogy?
Oh man, Peter, your guess is as good as mine. Because even though the Old Republic isn't specifically medieval, it still has older technology. Soldiers still use bladed swords in addition to Jedi use lightsabers. It's definitely has a bit more of that medieval flair, even there aren't straight up castles. So I think we're back to square one. I think they're doing something completely different, but we'll see. I can't even make a good guess. I have no idea.
I know we like to bag on other studios when they start to create, their own cinematic universes, the dark universe and such. Now Lucasfilm is announcing not three movies that they hope to start franchise, but 3 trilogies. So, Chris, are they overreaching here?
I don't think so. I just because there's so much history with Star Wars and these stories. I mean, there's also history with the Universal monsters, and Universal completely blew that. But I think like Lucasfilm and Disney have been doing this a little longer, and they have a better idea of how to handle things. And at the same time, nothing is a sure thing. I mean, who would have thought that Solo would have underperformed the way it did? Who would have thought that they would have just stopped doing these anthology films the way they are doing now? So, this could always backfire as well. But I think it's all going to depend on who they get to handle the properties. I don't watch Game of Thrones, so I don't really have an opinion on those guys. I like this writer's work. I really like Rian Johnson. So if they're finding the right creative people, it might work out. But it all depends on who does what.
Yeah, and if I have any real criticism of the Disney Star Wars films, it is that they chose to go filmmaker centric and not have a grand arc vision for their stories. I love that these 3 new franchises or 3 new trilogies that it's going to be filmmaker driven, and you're gonna have these people probably creating the whole arc for these stories, and it's gonna feel like more of a cohesive thing. Ben, are you agreeing with me here?
I think so. I kind of am wondering if they're overshooting a little bit, though. I just feel like this is a lot, and especially to be making these announcements publicly. There's one. I mean, I guess BuzzFeed broke this story, right? So I don't think Lucasfilm put out a big announcement about it in the same way that they did with the Rian Johnson and the Game of Thrones guys. But I don't know. This is. I was surprised when I read this that I was like, really? They're doing more? It just seems like an awful lot of stuff. And I'm wondering if this is a contingency for, if, for example, the Game of Thrones guys, their first movie is a huge dud, then this could maybe swoop in and be like a pivot point away from that trilogy or something like that. I don't know. I mean, that's all speculation on my part. There's no reason to assume that Benioff and Weiss won't be able to work well in this universe. But I don't know. Yeah, I just that was my gut reaction when I heard this news.
And I remember when they announced the new Star Wars dates, you wrote up the story and you were theorizing that we might alternate between their Star Wars film and Rian Johnson's Star Wars film. Now that we have this third one in the mix, like, does that mean that we're going to have to wait 4 years to get the second installment of each of these films?
Yeah, that certainly throws a bone into my prediction there, because now, I mean, yeah, if you're cycling 3 trilogies at once and like dropping in an entry like every other year or whatever it was that they said they're going to do, like that's too much for the general public to be able to figure out. Right now, it was, we were only dealing with the saga movies and then the occasional spin-off and stuff. But once you add more to that, it's just going to get more confusing for the general public.
Okay, let's move from one side of Lucasfilm to the other. Indiana Jones 5 is still in the works, and Harrison Ford was doing an interview where he was asked, what is the future of Indiana Jones beyond the actor himself? Chris, what do we know?
According to Harrison Ford, that's it. There is no future of Indiana Jones without him. He wants the role to die with him. And I'm not even going to use his quote because you need to actually watch it to get the full effect, because it's very funny just to hear grumpy Harrison Ford joke about this. Of course, it's worth noting that he doesn't have the final say, and Lucasfilm can always change their minds and give it to someone else. But as far as Harrison Ford is concerned, that's it. He is the beginning and end of Indiana Jones, and after he shoots Indiana Jones 5, the upcoming Indiana Jones 5, that's going to be it. There will be no more Indiana Jones films.
Yeah. I mean, you do say that he doesn't have the end say, but from what I understand, there is an agreement in place that there are, 3 different cooks in this kitchen. So there's Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Harrison Ford. And that's also causing some of the trouble of why this movie's been delayed. It seems like those 3 people can't agree on what the future of the indie story is. So I'm wondering, does Harrison Ford have control of this franchise? And is this a smart idea?
Yes, it is a good idea. There should not be any more Indiana Jones films without Harrison Ford. I don't think this is a role like Batman or James Bond where it would make sense to pass it on. Like, Indiana Jones is so tied into who Harrison Ford is, and to have someone else play it would just be really weird. And I personally wouldn't like it.
Yeah. I think we saw that with Solo as well, so you are probably right. Although, me being an indie fan, I kind of wish they could do something like what they were planning with the Die Hard movie, the McQueen Year One, where it's kind of, indie now intercut with a younger indie, introducing, a new actor into that franchise. And that way you would also get around the fact that, Harrison Ford can't run around at this age as well. So, but it looks like that's not happening. So, okay. Speaking of actors approaching past their prime, Sylvester Stallone has recently done an interview talking about his idea for a new Rocky movie. Ben, what is going on here?
Yeah, so Stallone was at the Cannes Film Festival, and there he was doing like a career retrospective press conference Q&A kind of scenario, and somebody asked him, I guess, if he was interested in being in more of the Creed movies, and he said no. And that makes sense to me, because when Creed 2 came out, he announced that he was done playing Rocky Balboa, but he said no. And then he also followed that up with, quote, I have a great idea for Rocky. He finds this fella in the country illegally, and it becomes a whole thing. It's like the magician who lost his tricks. You've seen everything, but what can be different? Throw him out of the country. He's in another world.
What's that mean?
I don't really know. I think trying to parse what appears to be a garbled mess of words, I think what he's saying is he has an idea for a new Rocky movie in which Rocky finds an illegal immigrant in the United States, and then maybe Rocky returns with that immigrant to the home country of that person, and theoretically, I'm filling in the blanks here now, but maybe theoretically trains that person as a boxer? I don't know. guys, do you want to see more Rocky movies? I can't imagine the answer is going to be yes. But please, if somebody has an idea for why this would be a good idea, I would love to know.
Rocky passed the torch to Creed. We don't need a remake of Rocky 5 in a different country, if that's even what he's saying. Ben and I talked about this offline with writing the story. We have no idea what he's trying to say with this statement. It makes zero sense, and I feel like either it's been mistranslated or misquoted, or Stallone is mumbling as he often does. But it's extremely frustrating that we can't report this cleanly because I have no idea what it means.
I mean, I will say this. I'll play devil's advocate, guys. When Creed was first announced, I don't think we were all excited about that. That sounded like a bad idea at the time, and that turned out to be amazing.
Sure, but the Rocky character has already had 2 huge comebacks that were completely unexpected, right? Like, nobody thought that Rocky would be able to come back in 2006 with Rocky Balboa, and that movie was, like, pretty good, like, surprisingly good for the amount of time that had passed between Rocky 5 and Rocky Balboa, right? So then we're like, okay, wow, yeah, Stallone, like, had more to say with this character, and he came back and actually managed to pull it off in a way that wasn't terrible. Good for him. And then the Creed movies came around, and we're like, oh, this is actually a really cool idea to sort of spin it off into its own thing, put the focus on somebody else, turn him into a supporting character. That's great. The first movie is awesome. Second movie is fine. But you're telling me that he wants to do this again? Like, why on earth would he want to risk the legacy of this character who right now, even with Creed 2 not being nearly as good as the first movie, or as Creed 1, I should say, people still are pretty fond of this character or still look upon him fondly, I guess. So why for somebody like Stallone, who is so concerned with these ideas of legacy and revisiting these characters over and over again, why would he not be able to sense that this is the time to go out? And it seems like he did sense that when he said he was done playing this character, but now he's going to come back for this. I don't know.
Ben, this is the guy that's making escape plan movies still when no one wants escape plan movies.
Yeah, but that's different because nobody gives a shit about that. It's like Bruce Willis making direct-to-DVD action movies in Bulgaria or whatever, and it's like, yeah, man, get your paycheck, whatever. Nobody really, it's the characters that. I don't even know what his character's name is in Escape Plan. It doesn't have the same like cultural penetration into the zeitgeist that Rocky does.
Man, his name is Escape Plan. It's Mr. Escape Plan. Clearly.
Okay, let's move on briefly. When HBO's Neverland documentary series came out and it kind of had this expose on the accusations against Michael Jackson, I wondered, I think on this podcast, if Taika Waititi's movie that he had in development, it was based on this Blacklist script called Bubbles, which is telling the story of Michael Jackson through the eyes of his pet Chimp. I was wondering if that was going to be canceled because it seems like Hollywood, is turned the page on Michael Jackson at this point. And Chris, we now know the future of this movie. What do we know?
There is no future of this movie. The official reason for it being over and done with is because Taika Waititi is going to Akira. He's going to shoot Akira, which I guess we'll talk about next. But so it's being listed as scheduling difficulties, and him pulling out of the movie in turn made Netflix pull out of the movie and shut it down. So that's the reason they're giving officially, but I think we can all read between the lines and guess that the other reason really is because of leaving Neverland and how Michael Jackson's legacy has just become extra radioactive this year. So, like I said, read between the lines. That's probably why this is really happening.
Yeah. And you mentioned Akira. This is a movie that I feel like I didn't think was ever going to happen, especially with Taika, but it now has a release date. It seems like the train is moving, but I mean, I guess the train was moving on Gambit too. But Ben, is this going to happen?
I think it's finally going to happen, man. Warner Brothers has given a release date of May 21st, 2021 to the Akira movie that Taika Waititi is directing, and this is nuts. It's the same weekend as John Wick Chapter 4. As Jacob alluded to in our Slack channel, one of those movies is probably going to move before all is said and done. I'm guessing it's going to be John Wick.
That seems like a horrible idea to release those two on the same weekend.
Yeah, it definitely is. But, there's several years in between now and then for somebody to flinch and decide to go elsewhere. But, yeah, this is one, this idea, like, Leonardo DiCaprio was talking about starring in this in 2008. That's how long ago Warner Brothers has been working on this movie, and now DiCaprio is just still on board, but just as a producer. But yeah, this is nuts. I certainly never thought that we were going to actually see a live action version, mostly because I don't know if you guys have seen Akira, but it is a bonkers movie. Like I watched it for the first time, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and was just sort of like, my mind melted when I watched it. Like, what in the hell is this thing? And I can't imagine a major studio like Warner Brothers putting out an accurate version, a direct adaptation. I think Waititi has said in the past that he wants to do sort of his own riff on the original manga. But man, yeah, I mean, it is. You know how like the end of the Watchmen comic is like this insane, squid creature comes in and it like destroys the psyches of like, kills all these people and does all this.
It was unadaptable.
Stuff. Yeah, the Akira, watching the anime version of Akira, it felt very much the same kind of thing to me. So I don't know, Jacob, what do you think? I mean, have you seen the original Akira, and what do you think about Waititi doing a version of it here?
I really like the original Akira, but it's definitely it is two things. It is one, very, very, very Japanese centric. Everything about that story is from Japanese storytellers telling the kind of story that's inherent to Japan and its culture. And two, as you say, it goes to extreme, crazy, like Cronenberg meets Michael Bay style shenanigans in its final act. So I know there's been a lot of backlash in the past years. I know at one point there's going to be Wame Colette Serra directing Leonardo DiCaprio in it, like 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the backlash has always been, this is not a white person story. And now they have a person of color, Taika Waititi, doing this, but even he's not Japanese. So I'm very, very curious what the approach is, because it's the same way that a lot of American Godzilla movies don't quite work, at least the earlier ones didn't, because Godzilla is a character rooted so much in the Japanese psyche and comes from the pain and trauma of the atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I feel like we didn't get a good American Godzilla movie until we had 9/11 to lean on as a touchstone for Americans with Gareth Edwards' film. So it's my long-winded way of saying I have no idea how you take a story this Japanese and make it not Japanese, which is the only way to make a Hollywood movie like this.
Okay, well, I'll believe it when I see it. I know Taika's involvement gets me excited, but I'm going to remain a little bit pessimistic or cynical for now. Let's jump into the mailbag. We're going to answer a question that was, I think, submitted probably a year ago. We're digging deep into this mailbag. Nick E writes in. He's curious if we have any directors who you believe are not getting enough recognition for the art they put out. For example, he mentions Denis Villeneuve, who puts out amazing work, but no one in my circle talks about it ever. I used to think the same of Rian Johnson, and his talents got rewarded with Star Wars. So I guess this is an interesting question, because he's not asking for up and coming filmmakers. He's asking for filmmakers who are not getting enough recognition, which means they probably have more than a couple movies, right? And this is a tough question. I was thinking about this, and my first thought was someone that actually hasn't directed a proper theatrical feature film, and that's Hiro Murai. This is the guy that he's directed. His claim to fame is he was a music video director, but his claim to fame is his collaboration with Donald Glover, and he's worked on Atlanta. He's directed episodes of Barry, Legion. He did that Guava Island, which I haven't seen. But even though he hasn't directed a film, I feel like a lot of people are not talking about this guy. I don't know. I feel like he has a huge future in films coming up, and I feel like he should be like one of those guys that's announced for a Marvel movie, and I haven't heard him in the conversation for anything, which is kind of strange. Maybe that's because he's saying no to it all. Who knows? The other person I wanted to mention is Alex Garland, who did Ex Machina and Annihilation, and he was a screenwriter before that. And he's just doing fantastic work, which is acclaimed in the critic circles, but is not, making money at the box office. And he is notoriously very opinionated, very much an auteur, and I think probably that's why, he's not being offered a Star Wars or Marvel movie. He very much has his vision. Chris, who would you say is an underrated filmmaker who needs more recognition?
Let me just first preface this by saying I'm a little alarmed, Peter, that your two criteria here is that neither of these guys are being offered Marvel movies.
Well, that's not my criteria, but I'm saying that people are not seeing their movies.
I know what you're saying.
Well, first of all, Hero doesn't have a movie, but Alex Garland, his most successful movie is what? Ex Machina, maybe? Annihilation? I'm not even sure. I don't
know if either of those were what I would call
successful
hits. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, but my pick would be James Gray, who is a director who is really well known in like indie film circles, but I don't think anyone really knows who this guy is. He directed The Immigrant and We Own the Night. He has a new movie coming out at some point called Ad Astra. He is a phenomenal filmmaker. He makes very low key. I don't even want to call them quiet because they're not quiet, because they have they will have like action and violence in them, but it's not like what you're used to. He directed a movie called The Lost City of Z, which is phenomenal. No one really talks about this guy or his films, and he has this really unique eye in this storytelling sense, which you think where like what kind of story you're getting into. Like, We Own the Night, it came out kind of soon after The Departed, and it had Mark Wahlberg in it, who was also in The Departed, and all the marketing tried to sell it as sort of like The Departed 2.0. And even though it's like a crime movie, and even though it involves cops and people undercover, it's not like The Departed at all. It's like a completely different movie, and I just really wish more people would talk about his work and would just know who he is, but I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Chris, I have to admit, I've only seen We Own the Night of all of his movies. Where would you recommend that I jump in beyond that?
I would definitely recommend Lost City of Z. That's really good. Just go with that. He has a whole bunch of stuff, but Lost City of Z and We Own the Night would be like my top two picks for like a great example of what kind of work he does.
Cool.
Jacob, who are your picks?
My first pick is a director who I think may be my favorite working director who is not appreciated by mass audiences, and that's Ben Wheatley, the English filmmaker behind maybe my favorite horror movie of the past 20 years, Kill List, one of my favorite films of all time. Very slow burn, very terrifying, very upsetting. But he's very versatile. He also made a crime comedy called Down Terrace, a spectacularly funny pitch black comedy called Sightseers that, if it had the Coen brothers' name on it, would have been a cult classic by now. The really trippy, weird experimental Field in England, High Rise with Tom Hiddleston, which is this really ambitious adaptation of the J.G. Ballard novel that kind of came and went. Free Fire, extremely violent, dark comedy that bombed very hard despite a very large cast and a big marketing push. And that was supposed to be his big breakout, and it didn't quite happen. And he has a new movie coming out soon called Happy New Year, Colin Burstead. And he keeps getting attached to things, like he has a remake of Rebecca, a horror action movie called Freak Shift. He was even attached to a remake of Wages of Fear at one point. But I feel like Ben Wheatley is always working on the fringes. Maybe he likes it that way. I don't know. But I feel like he directed 2 episodes of Doctor Who in 2014. It's like more people have seen his Doctor Who episodes than maybe all the rest of his movies combined. And I think he's a spectacularly talented guy. And the ability to jump between thrillers, horror, comedy, experimental film, it all blows me away. Even when his movies are weaker than others, he's such a distinctive, strange voice, and I adore his work. I also want to talk about Nacho Vigalondo, the Spanish filmmaker who broke out with Time Crimes in 2007, and then didn't take off the way I think a lot of people expected to. Time Crimes is this very low budget, very small, like 3-location time travel thriller, or with this undercurrent of great dark comedy. They made movies like Extraterrestrial, which is good, Open Windows, which is pretty good, and more importantly, he made Colossal 3 years ago with Anne Hathaway, the giant monster comedy with Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis. And Colossal, I thought that would be a movie that got him on the map and got him like being offered all the big stuff, and it really wasn't. It kind of came and went. And I think Colossal is a spectacular movie, and he has such a offbeat, wry, funny, humanistic tone to his genre efforts that I'm waiting for somebody to realize that he should be directing something bigger.
I really liked Time Crimes. I liked his short films. I liked. I don't know. I feel Colossal is good, but it's not as accessible. I feel like that's the problem with Nacho, is he's making films for a niche. Yeah, maybe, but I also feel like there should be a smart executive who realizes that he's making these niche movies so extremely well that he could that his voice could translate to something maybe a bit more populous. I think he needs not a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie, but he needs to be given like $50 million to make something more sizable than he is now. By the way, I want to defend myself again because I feel like I'm getting attacked for this. But the writer, the person that wrote in, Nick E., specifically pointed out Rian Johnson in getting a Star Wars movie. So that's where I was coming from.
So I didn't even have to be an attack, Peter. But yeah, I don't want Ben Wheatley or Nacho to make a Star Wars movie. I think they'd probably be wrong for it. But I do think that somebody's going to
watch the hell out of a Nacho Star Wars movie.
A Ben Wheatley movie that's just a stormtrooper trapped under a wreckage of a Star Destroyer starving to death. I'd watch that.
Yeah. Ben, what about you?
Well, you took mine, Peter, which was Alex Garland, but I've come up with a few more since then. Drew Goddard is the big one for me. He wrote Cloverfield, and he directed The Cabin in the Woods and Bad Times at the El Royale. I feel like he's 2 for 2 as a director, even though I like Cabin in the Woods a little bit more than Bad Times. But he's terrific, and I've been following his career for a long time, and he's known, but not nearly as known as somebody like J.J. Abrams, who Nick E. also mentioned in his email. Jeff Nichols is another really great one. I loved Take Shelter and Mud, which are 2 smaller movies that he made. I wasn't crazy about Midnight Special, but there's a lot of promise there. And I haven't seen Shotgun Stories or Loving, which is his most recent movie. But just the specificity of his filmmaking and the consistent quality across his filmography, I think is worth making sure that he's on your list if you're looking for directors who don't have enough recognition. Shane Carruth is another one. You guys were talking about Time Crimes. Shane Carruth directed Primer, which is another low-budget time travel movie that I'm sure if you're any kind of cinephile, you've at least heard of, if not tried to watch several times and figure out what the hell is going on in that movie. I feel like less talked about is his second feature, which is Upstream Color, which is sort of this like poetic masterpiece that I still don't know if I fully understand, but it is a hell of a movie. So I think he's only directed 2 features. I should have looked that up beforehand, but I think he's one of those guys. Right. Yeah, he's one of those guys that stories will crop up every few years, like, oh man, Shane Carruth is gearing up for another movie, and everybody's like, holy shit, when is this going to happen? And it just sort of doesn't. So I don't know. I feel like I've heard stories that he has other jobs and other kinds of work that he does, and he just sort of makes movies when he wants to make them, which is like a great place for him to be in, and a great place for the audience, his fans to be in, frankly, because that means that he's not just like doing something just to check off a box. He's only making projects that he's really, really passionate about. So put him on your radar for sure. I
will say this. I saw Primer at the 2004 Sundance Film Festival, was blown away. I love Shane's work, but I think Shane makes Nacho Vigalondo look like Steven Spielberg in accessibility.
Oh yeah, I mean? Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, these movies are very. I mean, they are his voice, and they're like almost impenetrable to some degree, but they're also just accessible enough that it makes you want to understand them. It's not like something that, for me anyway, I'm sure everybody's mileage may vary here, but I never watch his movies and go, fuck this guy. Like, this is pretension. This is nonsense, whatever. I'm always like, there's enough there emotionality wise and all of that to sort of pull me into the worlds that he creates. So, check out. Yeah.
There's a screenplay that he's written that's been floating around for years called Atopiary. And apparently it is an extremely ambitious $150 million science fiction adventure film that no studio wants to touch because it's so risky.
Yeah.
And it's out there. It exists in script form. So this is my call to Slash Film readers. If you happen to have a PDF of Atopiary, send it our way, please.
Yeah, or if you happen to be somebody in the industry who, who works for somebody important, put that script on their desk too, and maybe this movie will actually get financed. And then just two more quick names. Leslie Headland, who directed several of the episodes of Russian Doll. She co-created that show with Amy Poehler and Natasha Lyonne. She's great. She made a movie called Sleeping with Other People that I really like, sort of a low-key rom-com movie. I feel like she probably should be in more of these types of conversations. And then Justin Simien, who's only made one movie, Dear White People, I think that was 2014, but he has since gone on to turn Dear White People into a Netflix show that is really, really, really good. And I think one of Netflix's best original shows, and something that, especially after the second season, for some reason, people just didn't really talk about it. And it's so, so good. So he has a new movie coming up. I think it's called Bad Hair, that he is either filming or in post-production on right now. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that one is just as good as what he's done already. So that's Justin Simien. Put his name on your list, too.
Very cool. I think that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. If you have a question that you'd like to hear answered in the mailbag, send it to us at peter@slashfilm.com. All the stories we talked about in today's podcast, you can find in the show notes and on slashfilm.com. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you on Tuesday.